So let's talk about those scenarios. The president himself, personally, very, very popular. And that kind of halo effect is over the party at the moment. But he needs to get north of 55%, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think the margin of the victory is what's at issue here. To the extent he gets closer to 60, he will have the political space to implement his modernization agenda, including trying to effectively get the state-owned enterprises and a raft of economic reforms firmly in place with a cabinet at the end of May that would signal a great amount of confidence. And the market will be very bullish in their reception of a clean slate of very effective ministers in that cabinet, reflecting that he's been able to show down his enemies within the ANC and put in place these modernizers that he has available within the ANC. But if he gets an underperforming result from the population, he will find it very difficult to have that showdown within the ANC.
OK, so let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. So what happens? Let's talk about that scenario. How will the markets react if it's sub 55? Kind of how much pressure will he be from within the ANC? Could he survive that kind of process?
There are three factors in an underperformance. One is the overall result of the ANC. Second is on the provincial aspects. Do they maintain the big metros, Gauteng, Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal? And the third is the EFF, the Julius Malema factor. If they outperform while the ANC underperforms, it's a very strong signal that populism is on the rise in South Africa. The combination of those elements would be very negative for prospects for modernization and reform. He would find it very difficult to put in place his dream team in South Africa, and that, in all likelihood, from a market's point of view, would lead to a downward pressure on all asset prices, equities, currency, and on the debt side. The reverse is also true. If he outperforms, you'll see asset prices rally. I do believe any which way of the bookends, you'll see a very sharp reaction in the markets. If we'd see a 55% type victory for the ANC, it'll be more of the same. You won't see much movement.
Interestingly, you say if he receives too much support, that will also be a problem in the sense that he'll have to deal with Eskom in a different way. So above 55, and that's going to be a problem.
I wouldn't say it's a problem. I think that from our point of view, looking as market players at state-owned enterprises, getting a firm grip on the operational crisis at Eskom, including the fiscal and operating issues around the power plants, is the only way forward. This is about how he puts in place firm management, firm governance, and also gets a showdown on corruption, which has effectively undermined the turnaround at Eskom. I think the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, feels that he is winning the battle on getting operating stability, which is the first step. But in the longer term, it's a question of how to reform that entity and bring effectively its fiscal position and its operating position back into balance.
Yeah, we should remind viewers that the power monopoly required a $335 million bailout to stop a default just last month alone. Now, Goldman has generally been pretty much more optimistic on economic prospects for South Africa. Tell us why, Colin.
Well, I would say there's downside to the economic forecast, which is 1.9% for 2019, relative to the market around 1.3% for 2019, and we are 2.5% in 2020. The market is certainly not yet above 2%. So I think that is more a function of global markets. There's obviously a solid wind at the back of emerging markets with lower US interest rate forecasts than would have been the case a few months ago. Commodity prices in a solid place. And so there's wind at the back for emerging markets, feeding growth prospects. You must remember, Vonnie, I would say, over the last 25 years, we've had an average 3% growth rate over the last 25 years and a population growth rate of 1.5%. So these numbers are extremely disappointing. Whether we achieve the market consensus forecast of 1.2 or 1.9% in Goldman Sachs' case, actually we're underperforming immensely. So what that means is we need to get out of this election a strong mandate for structural reforms. That's what the rating agencies are hoping for. That's what Moody's did when they gave us space by keeping the investment grade rating in place. And that's where the markets will optimize, and we will see a large move positively in asset prices to the extent that the president gets a 60% mandate and has a much firmer hand on moving the country forward and putting his dream team in place.
Let's talk about that dream team. In the past, the choice of finance minister has provided some volatility when it comes to the rand. Tito Mboweni, let's talk a little bit about whether or not he's going to turn his phone off and head off into the sunset. Who's going to be the next finance minister, do you think?
Well, it's obviously a matter of great speculation. I think the markets would very much like to see him stay. They would like him to keep his phone on and keep doing what he's doing. You know, on the substance of what he's done, he has obviously taken some controversial points of view on some of the state-owned enterprises, for example, South African Airways, and the ability of keeping that going. But he's held his ground, and he's basically said, look, the debt to GDP ratios of South Africa are at its limits, and we must do what we can within the limits of our current constraints. And he's played a very important role. So I think the markets would very much like to see him stay.